Hey. Hello, my name's Josh Gabbatiss, and I'm the policy correspondent at Carbon Brief. We're a specialist climate change website based in the UK, and yeah, I cover a lot of policy related issues. I'm just going to share into my presentation. Um, so I'm hoping that you can all see my screen now. Um, so I'm gonna I've actually been a bit out of the loop of carbon offsets for about a year now. That's my first admission. But at the end of 2023, myself and my colleagues at Carbon Brief did a big series investigating carbon offsets. Um, so I'm going to assume a certain base level of knowledge about carbon offsetting from this audience, but yeah, in short, I mean, carbon offsetting is all about companies, governments buying some sort of credits that represent emissions cuts or emission savings somewhere else in order to offset their own emissions. We published a very, very long explainer article, which hopefully would answer all of your questions about carbon offsets if you're interested. We also published a glossary, an infographic showing how offsetting works, things like this. So hopefully I can direct you to these after this call if people are interested. We also did some sort of data-driven investigations over the course of this series. I'm just going to give you an overview of one of those now, and then pass on to my colleagues here who will talk more about the sort of Africa focused aspect of this. I think, whereas my project was more kind of general. So someone just is someone asking a question? No, I can't see. Uh, sorry. Anyway, so yeah, this is a more sort of general thing. I was looking at the voluntary offset market specifically, um, which some people may be aware is when a company says something like we are going net zero or we are selling carbon neutral products or something like that, that will be reliant often on buying offsets from the voluntary market. So it's so that they can go to their shareholders or to the public and say, look, we're doing lots of good stuff for the climate. Um, so I wanted to look at basically, here are some things that I was trying to look at. How much some of the biggest companies in the world were relying on offsets to reach their net zero goals, and also where in the world they were buying these offsets from, what kind of yeah, and also to what extent we can trust those projects to actually demonstrate an emissions reduction. So we can sort of go into that a bit later on, but basically there are a lot of question marks over uh, whether these offsets they're buying are any good. The first thing I found is that basically it was very hard to know where offsets are being bought from. I essentially wanted to just show really simply, if Shell is buying millions of offsets. Where are those coming from? There are databases that exist which should show these things, but in practice, they often don't. So this might not mean much to people, but basically there are registries which contain information about all the offsets that are bought and sold. But the problem with a lot of them is they're just missing huge amounts of data. This is a problem that a lot of people have pointed to. A lot of journalists who've looked into this have come across this same problem. Um, so you can see from these charts that I made of these are some of the major registries, and they just show a load of the projects. A lot of the sort of transactions rather are just missing data about where the offsets are coming from and who's retiring them, who's using them. Um, so I need to overcome that. So to do that, uh, I've kind of gone ahead gone ahead here a bit. But to do that, I essentially used a methodology that I'd adapted from a team of researchers led by a guy called Gregory Trencher at Kyoto University. Basically, he had just combined different data sets that are available either from consultancies or public submissions by companies and pieced together the 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 available data on offsets. It wasn't necessarily comprehensive, but it was kind of his best effort. And he had done this for the four biggest oil and gas companies. So Shell, BP, Chevron, and Exxon. I wanted to expand that out and do it for a bunch of other companies too. So I did it for the 50 biggest companies that have net zero targets. I got that from a database called Net Zero Tracker. Um, and by combining together those data sets with existing data from the registries that I mentioned before, I was able to produce these charts which show sort of how offsets flow around the world. So kind of this shows you that when Shell is saying that it's going net zero, some of those claims are reliant on offset projects in places like Kenya, Peru. So these will be quite often uh, forest conservation projects, tree planting projects, which are then being used to offset the emissions of an oil company. And actually, I found that of the 50 top companies, of the offsets bought by these 50 top companies, I think something like three-quarters of them were used by oil companies and car companies. I think it was those two. Yeah. So obviously quite problematic in the sense that these are high emitting industries that are responsible for a lot of burning fossil fuels that are then offsetting their emissions in countries in the global south, often preserving rainforests or something like that. The reason that's problematic is that quite often um, there's problems with with these offset projects, and these have been well trodden by many excellent journalists. And this is really an area where journalists, people have, scientists have said this to me, journalists have really led the charge in kind of revealing the problems with offsetting, ahead of researchers. Researchers are kind of playing catch up really. So this analysis showed that these 9 offset projects were responsible for a huge share of the total offsets that were bought. Um, Many of these projects, I mean, I've highlighted the Kariba project in Zimbabwe. This has been very controversial, and I mean, I off the top of my head, I can't remember the name of all the people that have done it, but various journalists have done investigations into this project, and it is yeah, faced enormous backlash. And I think the main certifier or something like that, I forget the exact details, has withdrawn from this project as a result. It's things like um, human rights violations, evidence that the project isn't cutting as much emissions as it says it is, which is a massive problem because if you have these ostensibly uh, permanent emissions cuts that are being claimed by a company, but actually you go to the project and you find those emissions cuts just aren't taking place in real life, then that is clearly a problem. Um, I've also highlighted here that a large chunk of the projects were Red Plus, which is it's the term for a type of carbon offsetting related to forest conservation. Um, Again, this is a type of offsetting that has been a big focus. It's been very controversial. Again, a lot of journalists have done some excellent investigations showing that these projects are not reducing emissions as much as they claim to. And again, you can see here Volkswagen, Shell, Chevron basing their net zero claims on these Red Plus projects. I also just want to highlight here, this is another article that was done by my colleague Daisy Dunn. and also my other colleague Yanin Kiros, and they basically have just drawn together. This is just all. These are projects that other reporters have done investigations into. They basically aren't. This is the sort of the best we could do in sort of mapping out the sort of problematic offsetting projects around the world, because it's basically we just relied on journalists who've often just gone to the place and found and shown that there are, issues, because you can't rely often on the registries or the various middlemen companies that are involved in carbon offsetting. There's such a long chain of there's such a long chain between the people on the ground doing the project and then the person at the end buying the project, that it's very hard to know where the problems are arising. You often just need someone to go and just show, well, look, someone said there was going to be a forest here and there actually isn't. Sorry, I'm getting to the end of my talk, but I'll just whiz through quickly just to explain, because basically I think my message to people is that there are useful data sets out there if you know where to look, that will provide a really good starting point for any investigations you want to do in carbon offsetting. My focus was obviously very big picture, but I think if you were looking to do more local reporting, it would be useful to start here, and then in order to isolate like specific projects or areas you'd want to target. So the Berkeley Carbon Trading Project they do a brilliant job of basically drawing together all the different offsetting interactions, all the different buying and selling from different registries into one place. They have a big database. You can download it. The lead researcher is called Barbara Haya. She has been very helpful to a lot of people, a lot of journalists who've done reporting on this. She'll be, I'm sure, more than happy to help you if you approach her. Allied Offsets is a consultancy which I relied on heavily for this research, because they basically fill in a lot of gaps in the registries. So, for example, if there is someone who's bought some offsets and it doesn't say who's bought them, they will often be able to find out who it was, what company it was. And again, they have been very helpful to a lot of researchers, and normally they're a consultancy, so that you have to pay normally. But I think for journalists, for me, for example, they were happy to just provide stuff for free. CDP is an organization that basically they receive annual reports from companies on different aspects of climate action that they're undertaking. Often companies will report the offsets they've bought. It's another good place to look for carbon offsetting activity. I can send this round later because I'm coming at the end of my time now, but I would also say to check out Carbon Brief, because we've also done a lot of stuff explaining carbon offsetting. And yeah, my key messages to everyone are just, I suppose, this is all driven by data. It's really good to get familiar with the available data, and reach out to the researchers, the carbon offset researchers who are working in this area, because quite often I have found they are more than happy to help. And because they are seeing this process is moving very fast. It's a fast moving area. They want to have their research to have impact now, not wait for it to be peer reviewed and stuff like that in the scientific literature. I'll just leave it there because I'm over time.
Hi, so thanks very much, Josh, for that introduction. If you could just stop sharing your screen, that would be useful, then I can share mine. Thank you. Thanks to everyone who's joining us today. I see we've got lots of people from all around the world. I just want to share my, can everyone see this page here?
Yes.
Yeah, so basically this is my Pulitzer Center page, and it shows the main body of work that I received funding from the Pulitzer Center to investigate. I was the lead researcher and this page was a project that I did with my co-author, Angus Chapman, who's based in Sydney, Australia. And we covered off, and this is the project page over here, which I'll also just paste into the chat if you guys want to have a look. at what we did. We also did, and then I'll just also place another link to some follow-up work that I did. So I think the way that Josh explained his work at Carbon Briefs is very useful introduction to what I was looking at, essentially. Because what I really wanted to look at was what the journey of an individual carbon credit is, right? So kind of really looking quite granular, as they'd say, drilling down into what is quite a complex and opaque global market. So my co-author and I are both economists as well as journalists. I've worked predominantly as a journalist during my career, but I also did a PhD in finance, which was very useful for me to understand some of the financialization of climate change in a way. I think, the map that John was talking about in terms of all the different registries, I suppose where we started off as our starting point was we looked at all the different stakeholders, right? And we looked at the story we did for Vox is quite interesting. Let me just go a step back. So we did a few outputs for the story, and then here on the project page, we did a story for Vox. This is really quite in depth. This was 2,000 words, over 2,000 words, and very rigorously fact checked by Vox's investigation team. This was a really amazing experience to write in terms of how the Pulitzer Center supported our research and what we were able to do. And also the editors at Vox were really good in terms of how they pushed us forward. We also did one, so obviously this one explores the kind of tree planting type projects. This explores like the cook stove offsets that you can get. And we produced also a podcast, and we also produced, and then another thing that's important as a journalist is your work having impact. After I produced all the outputs for with my mentors at the Pulitzer Center, Christine Spoler was my main mentor on this project. I then did an event at the LSE where we had some of the global experts in this area speaking to us about, in fact, this guy here, Martin Berg. What's really great about the support that you get from the Pulitzer Center is that you can get access to, really opens doors for you, and people provide you lots of access. For the Vox project in particular, that one we did. So let me just go back again to just showing just the outputs first, and then, as Josh explained, the carbon market, I'm just going to look at the time. The carbon market has got different components to it. We sort of just started this work really going in cold, because you'll remember at COP28 in Dubai, that was when John Kerry made the announcement that countries should start looking again at carbon markets as a way to implement climate action. So before we started the work with Pulitzer, we kind of did an explainer, like what are carbon markets, how the idea developed from the Clean Development Mechanism, the Kyoto Protocol, just like some kind of nerdy background information. Then the work we applied for the grant that we did for Pulitzer, one of the, quite simply put, what we did was we looked at, we actually interviewed one of Angus's family friends, a guy called El, who, as a consumer, you can buy carbon offsets, and get a certificate. So you can do it maybe if you before you take a flight, or you can just do it as we all have different things charities or things that we like to support. So he was just doing it as something to do for the environment. He's giving £10 a month to a company called Ecology. And what we did is we actually looked at so they would give him a certificate this month you planted 10,000 trees in Kenya, or you did XYZ, you've bought X amount of carbon credits. And the question really was, what are these carbon credits? Where does the money go? How does it actually offset stuff? And that was kind of, it seemed like a little question, but the carbon market is quite convoluted. Essentially, there are two components of the carbon market. For journalists here, this is really the important thing to understand. The one part of the carbon market is state run. So countries, governments will run like a carbon market. The biggest one of these is the European, the ETS, European Carbon Trading Scheme. And that's worth, at the time that we were writing this article, it was worth 100 billion. The carbon market's actually not as big as what people, considering all the fuss that was in the markets. The voluntary carbon market, when we wrote the story, so the voluntary carbon market's the private markets. The ETS, so there's like a private market and a government-run market. So these carbon credits that are in contention is what's known as are situated as what is known as the voluntary carbon market. And that's where your tree planting projects, the registries that Josh mentioned, like Gold Standard, there are two main players in the VCM, and that's Verra and Gold Standard. And for our work, we were fortunate. We spoke to the CEO of Verra at the time, which was David Antonioli, and we spoke to the Chief Growth Officer at Gold Standard. And Angus also traveled to Geneva. You know, the UN red credits, the ones that were very much in contention. He actually spoke to the guy at the UN that ran that project. So what's really great is if you do get support from the Pulitzer Center, you can travel and you can meet people actually behind the scenes. And that was extremely useful for us, like to actually go to the UN in Geneva for this work and have the UN actually explain to us their side of the story in terms of how these projects work. So what happens is these companies will, verify the carbon credits, say this project actually happened, this offset actually happened. Gold Standard doesn't do the tree planting projects because they say that it's really difficult to calculate. And whereas Verra does do a lot of, and the reason that Verra is actually the main player is because it does a lot of the United Nations RED projects. So the project that we looked at was, we decided to look at a Gold Standard project. We looked at a cooking stove project in Kenya in the Aberdare Mountains. And essentially the logic behind this is that a lot of cooking in the global south happens on open cast fires, which emit a lot of smoke and CO2, and it's bad for the health of people. So these clean cooking projects are quite measurable in terms of they do actually change the lives of people. You can calculate how many cooking stoves were bought. They actually do bring down CO2 emissions. And that's kind of the main project at the time that we spoke to Gold Standard that they would be happy to do. So what we did is we actually then looked in the et al. Statement that he would get the credits for that month. We actually then drilled down. We looked at the actual credits. We then went to the actual registry. We looked at the actual project. We looked at how it was calculated. We looked at who was delivering the project. We spoke to the company that actually delivers the cook stove project, that Verra kind of uses as that procures the carbon offsets, I guess. So there's in Africa, the main players are, for example, Cocoa Networks, KOKO. It's run by a guy called Greg Mills, I think, who's a South African. Yes, I mean, so I don't know if the market's developed. This is 2 years ago, but essentially there were only the tree planting projects and the cook stove projects as far as I could see it. But the UN RED projects, there's a lot of controversy about this. So after we did the interviews with all these people, we then transcribed them. We wrote the stories. We did more research. The team at Fox fact-checked them for us. We also did a podcast where we took extracts of the interviews and we narrated it. We wrote a script. This is the journey of the carbon projects and the kind of, the UN RED guy defending his project. I would say also so that was, for somebody who's done economics as well, but also like just a journalist, curious mind, I found the support I had to do this research to be amazing, just in terms of my own understanding. I then went on to write some follow-up projects, and what was interesting about the work that I did at LSE, I then did the African leaders then called for global carbon tax. And I wrote this article about how carbon taxes actually work. And perhaps if you tax, so I mean, what I'm just trying to say, there's so many different routes that you can take with these carbon markets. In Africa, one of the controversies has been like, why are the carbon credits in South Africa, in Africa, so much cheaper than the ones that are sold in Europe? And people were saying that there was a big controversy and it's iniquitous. But the thing is, it's also about the carbon intensity. It's related to the carbon intensity of economies. So therefore, a carbon credit in Sweden, which is more carbon intensive. I'm not saying that this makes it right or fair or just. I mean, actually, if you then think that there should be transfers of money to as is being proposed at the various COPs, that rich countries should be paying poor countries for their emissions. Maybe the solution to that should be that there should be one carbon price, which should be $100 across all economies, so that the countries who are less carbon intensive can actually, that it works out for them. And then it's also interesting. Also, with the event that I had at the LSE, this new global carbon markets, this guy here, Ben Philawad, who's a PhD researcher at Grantham, or I think he's one of the fellows there. He actually was one of the teams that calculates. They do those actual calculations on the UN RED credits. It's like, they use science and whatever. And he spoke a lot. I mean, I would say, just watching, I'm about to wrap up because I know I have to finish in a minute. I would say that for journalists who are looking into this, I found that, a lot of the people, particularly the ones that were like kind of, defensive, especially the UN Red side. And I mean, Marco is a lovely guy, so is Ben. And David Anationi was lovely, and they all cooperated, but they were using this really sort of verbose, jargony language. And I actually, found myself getting quite frustrated when I was interviewing David Anationi. I was like, please explain it to me like you would explain it to a 5-year-old. It's like, it's not that I'm stupid. I've done economics. I just felt that people using these really big words, maybe because they were being defensive, but I think you have to insist that people explain things to you in plain language, because I think this is our work as journalists. And because I just sort of dug deeper, and I didn't care if they thought that I was stupid. I kept just asking to repeat it. I'd ask the question in different ways. I'd go and ask different people. I'll double check. We'd speak to people on the ground. And that way you can sort of triangulate the knowledge. I think it can seem very overwhelming and very technically complex, but I think, just do lots and lots of interviews and, find out for yourself. Don't take anything at face value and just look at the problem from all different angles. I hope that was useful. Happy to take questions at the end. Over to you, Élodie. Sorry.
Thank you, Desné. My name is Élodie Toto, and I'm reporting on Congo Basin for Mongabay. And with the Police Center, I've investigated on the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility in the Republic of Congo. So the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility is a World Bank initiative that aims at helping developing countries to implement REDD+ program, meaning program that aims to reduce deforestation and forest degradation. And by reducing deforestation, these countries sequester carbon. And the idea is to, at some point, generate carbon credits. So on paper, it sounds like a good thing because it does encourage states to preserve their forests, and they're getting paid to do so. They receive funding to implement REDD+ program, and then once they have proven that they have sequestered carbon, they also receive payments. So the FCPF now works with 47 developing countries across Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean. And just to give you an idea, in the Republic of Congo alone, the FCPF has contributed something like $40 million US. So it's substantial. But As Josh explained earlier, the issue is that this program often take place in remote areas and not so many people can actually verify whether they are being properly implemented in the target countries. So my investigation focused on one of these programs in Republic of Congo, the Sangha and Likwala program. And for this, I wrote 2 articles, a video report, and an explainer on what carbon credits are, because not so many people concretely know what it is. And all of this is published on Mongabé's and Police Center websites in French and in English. So at the end of my investigation, I found that at least 79 gold mining permits have been granted by the Congolese government since the start of the Red Plus program in the area of the program. And it's only the gold mining permits. There are also other types of mining permits that are being granted there, which is problematic because, as you may know, gold mining usually doesn't really allow people to sequester carbon, so it's quite not working together. And also I found that those permits were awarded to controversial figures, influential individuals in Republic of Congo, and sometimes even family members of the government officials. So it's important to understand that in the Republic of Congo, over the past decades, environmental issues have become central in the national agenda. And I mean, in a way, it does make sense because Republic of Congo is part of the Congo Basin, which is the second largest equatorial forests in the world. So plenty of occasion to store carbon there. And my investigation started with a report from civil society organization. It's a human rights NGO called OCDH. And when I read their reports, I saw that there were several gold mines in the Sangha region, so Sangha Likwala project, where we could see a serious deforestation, and that was depriving local communities of the forest resources they depend on. Back then, the Republic of Congo had just submitted a report claiming that they sequestered $8 million worth carbon, and they were ready to sell it to the World Bank. Back then, their report was still getting audited. But I decided to dig further. I found out that a few years ago, a journalist supported by the Police Center had already uncovered another destructive gold mine in the same area. So I did contact him. But even though he was a specialist of the area, he was not aware of the existence of a Red Plus project there, which kind of rings the bell. So before going further, I read every document I could find in the Sangha and Likwala Red Plus program, just to understand whether this activity were legal and if that problem was well known by the authorities, but also by the FCPS program. I think it's important to read all the institutional documents available to understand what the agreements are made of, what are the obligations of the signatories countries are, and what is the state of the country at the very beginning when all the contract and paperwork are signed. And in that case, the document was pointing that there were some mines in the region and that potentially in the long run, that could be an issue. But they were also planning to implement a system called EMIR that was aimed to reduce ecological impact of mining. But everything was very vague. So I digged further. I went into the Ministry of Mine documents. I saw that there was an history of artisanal mining in the region, but I also saw that it was regulated and there was a lot of action that was taken officially to limit the pollution. And also that there were not so many mines in the area still officially. So I contacted other NGOs, environmental, indigenous rights organizations, because the area I was investigating in was largely populated by indigenous community. I consulted reports from logging companies, because as it's a forest area, there was a lot of logging companies settled there. And beyond the OCDH reports and few media articles, there was almost no information about the presence of those coal mines in this area. So I decided to go on the ground, and I met local communities who live there, and they live in some poverty. They live with less than $5 a day. They have no access to electricity, to internet, even sometimes to phone. And that's important because that means that they are poorly informed, that they don't know much about what's happening in their own country, but also about their own rights. And most of the people I talked to had no idea that there was a Red Cross program there and that it was happening for years. So that kind of showed that probably something was not done by the book there. So when I visited, they showed me the impact of gold mine on the forests. I went to 2 former mining sites. The environment was degraded. There was no tree remaining. The water sources were really muddy. So, and that was the places where the mining has ceased. And then I went to a place where the mining was still going on, and it was far from artisanal. It was semi-industrial mining. I could see excavator, heavy machinery, and that actually explained why all the trees were completely out and all the damages that I actually seen when I was in the former mining sites. I also noticed that the mining site was guarded by a Congolese soldier. So soldiers are paid by the government, which means that the government was aware of what's happening on the ground, as they had someone who could actually report directly to them. And that was crucial. So back to Brazzaville, the capital of Congo. I met with the director of the Red Plus program, and he didn't seem bothered. He actually knew what was happening there. And he talked really openly about it, as if he was not really thinking that something bad could happen with his revelation. So when I was back home, I decided to look at the Congolese law, and I discovered that every mining permit must be published via decree in the official gazettes. And as it was legal mining, there was evidence. So I dig into those gazettes, and that's how I found those 17,9 gold mining permits. And I use all the information that was in the gazettes to make a map that showed the impacts that you can find that all those mine permits recover in the area. And it's a lot. It's nearly 15% of the Sangha territory. So in the official gazette, there were also GPS coordinates for each mining concession. The coordinates were presented point by point with degree and minutes, and there were something like 4 to 5 points per concession. So with the help of Pulitzer Center colleagues and the GPS data from the permits, I built a database and a map of all those permits using QGIS. So to put them into QGIS, I had to translate them into decimal format with latitude and longitude by creating a shapefile. They have a really, really great training online if you want to dig further into it. It was really helpful to create it, and also the team was very supportive. And once everything was done, I also used some pictures that I took once I was on the ground. And most of the smartphone today, when you take pictures, they actually store your GPS location. So you can use that to then put it in a shapefile and then put it in QGIS and then so exactly in which concession you are, and therefore who's responsible for the damages that you could witness. So I also showed all the images that I took to an environmental experts who confirmed that the operators were making no efforts to comply with the Congolese environmental law. And he also described it as wild exploitation. He pointed out that there was no way that someone could claim that they were storing carbon from the area aware because of all the degradation, the forest degradation that we could witness. So that was very important for the investigation. Then I started to look into who owned those permits. And the good thing is that in the official gazette, you had the GPS coordinate, but you had also the name of the owner. So I looked through various open source database like Vindata, Sayari, OCCRP, Aleph, and I found almost nothing. I mean, in the Republic of Congo, there is a lack of digital infrastructure. So I had to do it kind of old school by searching into newspaper, contacting local experts, academics, to find information about the owners of those permits. And that's when it actually became clear that several of those mine owners were actually children of ministers. Like, for instance, there was Josue Sledge Oba and Cornelia Gladys Oba, which are actually the children of the Minister of Mine, Pierre Oba. And there was also like someone like Ivan Nobiligi, which is the country director of Macefield Venture, which is the largest foreign investment company in Rwanda. So when you see that those mines actually belong to people who have that weight in the Congo politics and even in the world, because Rwanda is becoming more and more powerful, you understand that it's not just random company specialists, and that's probably there is something more to dig into it, and that the population may not benefit from all those gold mining, despite what the Red Cross program aims, which is had to develop those countries. So if you want more details, please feel free to contact me or just ask your question.
Thank you so much, everyone. And we'll jump to the questions, but I did want to highlight how you all mentioned creative research in a way, right? Like Élodie, you were just saying this. I got so far with the digital infrastructure, and then I started reaching out to experts and just your connections. And I also loved that you, Josh, borrowed a methodology from academia to find the answers that you were searching for. So yeah, I feel that as journalists, there's a lot of different connections that we can establish. I would invite everybody to continue using the Q&A button. There is a question here it's from an anonymous attendee that is saying, where is the training available for the spreadsheet, Élodie? And you created your own, so if you could share a little bit about that, how was your process of creating your own database?
Okay, so to create my own database, basically, I ran through all the official gazettes of Republic of Congo for the last 4 years. The Red Cross program started 4 years ago, so it was relevant to me to see what was happening during those all 4 years. So I really had to dig into all the gazettes, and there is one gazette per week. So I saw some of the permits, and then in the permits, they just give you all the information. So I started with the help of Police Center, I made a spreadsheet with the name of the concession, where they are, the GPS location, who owned them. And I started to see that some of the owners actually own different concession. It really helped me to understand where we stand. And with the GPS location, I actually managed to create a map to see the importance it has on the project. So it was very artisanal. It took months to go through all those documents. Just can you imagine 1 gazette per week, 50 week per year, 4 years, it took a while. So yeah, very artisanal, but at the end, it worth it.
Definitely. In the end, you reached your answer. There is a question coming from Eden, and he would like to understand from the panel, so this is open to you three. What impact do you think that Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, specifically 6.4, will have on the voluntary carbon markets in Africa? And I had to look this up, so I'll just share in the chat for everybody to see what Article 6.4 is mentioning. But it's basically they established a new mechanism for the validation and the issuance of carbon credits. So how do you all feel that this will impact the market?
So I can answer some of this, and I don't know, Josh, if you're aware of this Article 6 dispute. So the voluntary carbon market participants, so those would be maybe asset managers that sell carbon credits, or trading desks in investment banks where they trade offsets. They were pushing for the UN to ratify Article 6.4 at COP28. It didn't happen then. Then COP29, there was, the thing is, there's such a lot of dispute around the 6.4. Eventually, they did get it ratified at, which is what I understand, at Baku. And but I'm not sure if it's going to make the market less opaque or not. Josh, I don't know, or Élodie, if you have a view on those.
Élodie, do you want to? Is this something you've looked at? Or I can go.
I think I can let you answer this one because I was really specialized on one side of the carbon market, but yeah.
So yeah, I was following because we do a lot of coverage of the COPs, and I was following that slow process of trying to get the Article 6 markets agreed for many years, and I think I mean a big problem around it is that there was this original UN carbon trading mechanism, which the CDM, which was basically a massive problem. Like it funded a lot of projects that were going to be built anyway, which means the credits are basically worthless. There were loads of human rights violations, all sorts of terrible stuff. So they were really keen to make, well, some people were keen to make a new UN system that didn't repeat the same mistakes of the past, and they've spent many years trying to sort it out. I think it kind of remains to be seen how it'll impact the wider market, but they have tried to kind of, it's now this is so the thing about the voluntary system is that it's just a bunch of companies just doing their own thing, and there's been some attempts to regulate it, and I mean this is evidenced by what everyone's been talking about, right? There's just it's just people making up their own rules for how to trade carbon, whereas at least with a UN system there is in theory a kind of top-down system which has rules. So perhaps it could mean that like the overall quality of carbon offsets increases. But equally, I know that there are still some, after all these years, there are still some problems with some of the credits they've allowed to be used in the new system. For example, they've allowed a load of the old CDM credits to still be used, I believe. So, yeah, I don't know how it'll play out, but I think there's still reason to be suspicious.
Efforts are being made, but they must be tracked, right? For sure.
Yeah.
There's a very interesting question coming from Steve, and I think that this is open to the panel as well. He mentions that often reporters treat carbon finance as a one-off story or approach it with a mindset of exposing rather than explaining. So his question is, how can we make it more worthwhile and appealing for journalists to invest the time to deeply learn not just carbon finance, but the broader landscape of climate finance?
I'd really like to answer this one. Steve, I'm not sure if you listened to my intervention, but myself and my co-author on our story, we did quite a lengthy piece of work. I mean, we spent maybe, I'd say, 6 months. The Vox story took ages and ages to write. And we were both trained economists. And, I've continued that work as well, as I said, by bringing in other experts as well to increase my own understanding at the LSE. I've continued to write on that again, as each bit of knowledge gets inputted. I think I get that maybe some journalists have not maybe done robust investigation, but I think journalists that are very experienced in particular beat will have covered something for years and years and years, and I don't think that they're very superficial. In fact, what the Pulitzer Center allows journalists to do is exactly what your question asks. It allows journalists the time and the funding in order to go into a particular area in depth. Yes, I mean, I think obviously it's a very complex area, but I think the New Yorker article as well was particularly good. The one on the carbon projects, I think, in Africa as well, and something like that for the New Yorker long read will take easily, could take months and months of research. Writing these things are also pretty strenuous. It's like the piece we did for Vox was 2,000 words. I mean, I get what you're saying. Not all the reporting was great, but I think that journalists are doing really great work in this area. Sorry, I'm just kind of standing the Pulitzer Center as well, because that's exactly what these grants facilitate.
I will just add on what Desné just say. For me, it's more a matter of time and funding. Journalists are interested in their job and they, by essence, we are here to dig. So we love digging, we love go through those kind of issues. But for a while, environmental journalism was not considered as sexy. And press is facing a crisis. So we have less and less funding. So they will not put that much money on something that's not considered as sexy. So I think the most we can do is probably uncover some issues. And when people will see that there are issues, they will start to look for more information. And when a news owner will see that there is a need to have more information, hopefully they will allow us to have more time and more money to dig into it and to make it more as a public information that everyone should have access to.
Can I also just respond to this very quickly? I would say, as a journalist who works for an organization that writes a lot of very lengthy explainer articles, very in-depth, I would say, first of all, not many people read that. So that's one thing. Second of all, a lot of the journalists that so when you think about what motivates journalism and what gets funding in journalism, it relies on people reading it. So that's one thing. But also, a function of journalism is revealing stuff, exposing stuff, and I think often things are sold in that way. Perhaps you think that sold in too sort of a sensationalistic way, but it doesn't mean that people writing those stories don't understand the topic in depth. And I would also say just, some topics do need exposing. And I honestly think this is one of them. Like I said, I think journalists have really led the way and really shaped the conversation. About offsetting, and I hope it's made it better.
Sure. And just to maybe try to group the remaining questions that we have, but also building up on Steve's question. when you all are investigating a news story, right? You have a lead, you want to look into this. Do you normally prioritize the legislation side of things or how this works in a country, the voluntary market, and see what information you can find there, or a specific company that then you try to look into their annual reports if they're publicly listed? Or if you all could share a little bit of how you would structure, let's say, your reporting methodology. And with that, a final note of inspiration so we can close the session. And I'll hand it over to you first, Élodie.
Yes, I dig into all the all official information that are available because that's the basis. That's the most easiest information to get when people actually do, when states do what they're supposed to do, which is make those information public. And that's a lot of information that people sometimes don't assume they will give you so much, but it's a great base. So yeah, one should always dig into it. And it also answers a lot of questions. And because you have so many information, that helps you to find an angle or direction for you to dig in. And once I have that base, I can go further and go on the fields, talk more directly to NGO or even a political figure or industrial figure, but all the legislation is the basis that you know.
Desné, Josh.
Josh, you go first. Yeah. Sorry.
So, sorry, what exactly do you want from me? Sorry.
Just a tip on how you structure your methodology normally when you're
Okay.
following a lead, if it is following legislation, company records, or the voluntary market itself. And then a final note of inspiration for journalists that are on this beat and trying to create great stories like you all.
Oh, I don't know. How do I structure a methodology? I think it's sort of very different every time, but I think actually speaking to the last thing, I think just trying to sort of really understand the topic is a good start before you approach any story, and especially something like this. A note of inspiration. Well, I don't know. I think like I said before, this is just I think carbon offset reporting, as evidenced by the people on this call, it sort of shows that journalism can really make a difference. So I think you only have to look at how things have changed in recent months and years to see that.
Yeah, so I'll actually answer your question while touching on, there's a question from Emma Bryce that talks about the biodiversity credit markets, which is, I suppose, like carbon markets 2.0. Because, people are thinking of joining those agendas. But yeah, in terms of, for example, if I would approach a story like that with a biodiversity market, like any story that I go into, I think stakeholder mapping is really important, like figuring out who the main protagonists are in your story, like how they connected to each other, who the key people you absolutely must speak to. We've had a comment, for example, here where the New Yorker story did not speak to local people on the ground. The FT as well. I actually wrote a letter to the FT about the fact that some of their coverage did not consult African people on the ground. I think this is a big problem in the global north when where media institutions are a lot more powerful. I think it's really important to make sure that you speak to people on the ground who are affected by these projects to get more insights. So I think just kind of really knowing who the key people are that you need to speak to, so you triangulate the story. Also, just like read. I mean, and make sure that you understand all the terminologies. Just another thing. And also, one key thing I would say is my methodologies. I always say to people, tell your story like first say tell your friend like you tell your friend in the pub. So if you can tell your story in a simple way, like I want to look at the carbon market, this is what I want to do, then you can really, if you to show that you understand something is, as journalists, our job is to make, just also relates to Steve's question, like the stuff's all very complex, right? Our job as journalists is to present information in a way that ordinary people, the non-expert, can understand. But that actually requires you having quite a lot of in-depth understanding of whatever it is that you're covering in order to explain it in a way systematic and logical. So that's kind of my main things that any story that I cover, I try and tell that story in a simple way by knowing who the main protagonists are.
Amazing. Cheers to that. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Élodie, Desné, and Josh, and you all for being a part of our panel, for the great questions that you sent. A recording of this session will be up on the Pulitzer Center's channel, and I will also share the slides with you all through email. Thank you very much. Wishing you all a nice rest of your day.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.